Karoline Leavitt had always been the kind of person who preferred staying in the shadows. She wasn't shy in an awkward way. She just didn't feel the need to be the center of attention. Her friends often described her as thoughtful, calm, and easygoing. At parties or gatherings, she was usually the one sitting quietly in the corner, listening intently to conversations rather than dominating them. It wasn't that she disliked socializing. She simply enjoyed observing people more than participating in loud, boisterous activities. And while her quiet demeanor made her a great listener, it also meant she rarely stood out in a crowd. One Friday evening, Karoline found herself at her best friend Emma's house for a small dinner party. Emma had invited a handful of their closest friends, and the atmosphere was warm and lively. The dining table was set with flickering candles, plates of homemade lasagna, and bottles of sparkling water. Laughter echoed through the room as everyone caught up on life, shared funny stories, and teased each other good-naturedly. Karoline felt comfortable here, surrounded by familiar faces and the comforting aroma of food wafting from the kitchen. Dessert was served. The conversation took a playful turn. Someone suggested they play a game called Talent Roulette, where each person would take turns showcasing some hidden skill, or at least attempt to do something entertaining. Some guests groaned theatrically, claiming they had no talents worth sharing, while others eagerly volunteered ideas. There were jokes about juggling fruit, reciting poetry backward, and even attempting magic tricks with random household items. The room buzzed with excitement as everyone waited to see what absurd act would come next. When it was Karoline's turn, she froze for a moment, unsure of what to say. Up until now, she'd been content watching her friends make fools of themselves in hilarious ways, but now all eyes were on her. Emma, noticing her hesitation, leaned forward with a mischievous grin. "Come on, Karoline," she said, nudging her gently. "You're always so mysterious. I bet you're hiding some incredible talent under that quiet exterior." The group chuckled, egging Emma on. "Yeah, like maybe you're secretly an opera singer." Another friend chimed in, clearly joking. Everyone laughed, assuming Karoline would politely decline and pass the spotlight to someone else. After all, she wasn't exactly known for being bold or outgoing. But instead of brushing off the suggestion, Karoline hesitated. For a brief second, a flicker of uncertainty crossed her face, as if she were weighing her options. Then, surprising everyone, including herself, she gave a small nod. "I'll give it a try," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the hum of conversation. Her response stunned the group into silence. No one had expected her to agree. They exchanged glances, half expecting her to laugh and admit she was kidding. But when Karoline stood up and walked to the center of the living room, it became clear she was serious. A wave of nervous energy rippled through the room. Was this really happening? What could Karoline possibly have up her sleeve? Emma raised an eyebrow, trying to suppress a smirk. "Okay, but don't blame us if we start crying. Not because you're bad, of course, but because we're overwhelmed by your brilliance," she joked, earning a round of laughter from the others. Karoline smiled faintly, though her hands trembled slightly as she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. She looked around the room, meeting the curious gazes of her friends. This was completely out of character for her, and she knew it. Yet, there was something oddly liberating about stepping outside her comfort zone, even if it was just for a silly game. "So what are you going to do?" asked one of the guests, leaning forward with genuine curiosity. Karoline took a deep breath, her mind racing. She hadn't planned for this moment, but she realized she couldn't back out now. "I'll sing," she announced, her voice steadier than she expected. The room went silent again, this time with a mix of surprise and disbelief. Singing? Karoline? Sure, they'd teased her about having a secret opera voice earlier, but no one actually believed she'd go through with it. Now, as she stood there looking determined yet vulnerable, the mood shifted. The playful banter faded, replaced by an air of anticipation. "Wait, seriously?" Emma asked, her tone softer now. "You're really going to sing?" Karoline nodded, clutching the edge of her sweater for support. "Yes," she replied simply. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then, Emma clapped her hands together enthusiastically. "All right, show us what you've got. Let's hear it." She cheered, breaking the tension. The others joined in, offering words of encouragement as Karoline closed her eyes and prepared herself. Little did anyone know this impromptu performance was about to change everything, for Karoline and for the people lucky enough to witness it. Karoline stood in the center of the room, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure everyone could hear it. The playful chatter that had filled the space just moments ago had faded into an expectant silence. All eyes were on her now, waiting to see what would happen next. She felt a strange mix of nerves and determination as she took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. This wasn't how she'd imagined spending her evening, standing in front of her friends about to sing, but there was no turning back now. Choosing a song felt like the hardest part. Her mind raced through the tunes she knew by heart, the ones she'd hummed quietly to herself during long drives or while cooking dinner alone at home. Finally, she settled on a classic ballad, a song she'd loved for years but never dared to perform out loud. It was simple, yet powerful, with lyrics that spoke to emotions buried deep within her soul. Taking another deep breath, Karoline opened her mouth and began to sing. The first note hung in the air, soft and tentative, almost as if she were testing the waters. But then something remarkable happened. As the second note followed the first, her voice grew stronger, richer, filling the room with a warmth that seemed to wrap around everyone present. It was unlike anything her friends had ever heard before. Gone was the quiet, reserved Karoline they thought they knew. In her place stood someone entirely different, a woman whose voice carried depth, emotion, and a kind of beauty that stopped time itself. At first, the group sat frozen, their expressions caught somewhere between shock and awe. Emma's jaw dropped, slightly, her teasing grin replaced by wide-eyed wonder. Across the table, one of their friends leaned forward, his fork suspended mid-air, forgotten. Another guest pressed a hand to her chest, her lips parted in disbelief. No one moved. Not even to blink. They were completely mesmerized, unable to tear their gaze away from Karoline as her voice soared higher, weaving its way into the very fabric of the moment. What made the performance even more extraordinary was the raw emotion behind it. Karoline poured her heart into every word, letting the melody carry her feelings in a way words alone never could. There was vulnerability in her tone, a sense of honesty that resonated deeply with those listening. It was as though she wasn't just singing a song, she was sharing a piece of herself, laying bare parts of her soul she'd kept hidden for so long. And in doing so, she connected with each person in the room in a way none of them had anticipated. By the time she reached the chorus, the atmosphere had shifted completely. What had started as a light-hearted joke had transformed into something profound, something magical. Tears welled up in Emma's eyes as she watched her best friend pour her heart into the music. Even the most skeptical among them, the ones who might have rolled their eyes at the idea of Karoline singing, were visibly moved. One of the guests whispered, "Wow," under his breath, too stunned to say anything louder. Another wiped away a tear, nodding silently as if to acknowledge the weight of what they were witnessing. When Karoline finally sang the last note, the room remained silent for a beat longer than expected. For a moment, it felt as though time itself had paused, holding its breath alongside the listeners. Then, almost simultaneously, the spell broke and the room erupted into applause. It wasn't polite clapping or scattered cheers. It was thunderous, overwhelming, the kind of reaction usually reserved for professional performers on grand stages. People whistled, cheered, and called out compliments, their voices overlapping in a joyful cacophony. Emma was the first to speak, her voice trembling with emotion. "Karoline, I don't even know what to say. That was incredible. Absolutely breathtaking." She shook her head, still processing what she'd just heard. "Why didn't you tell us you could sing like that?" Karoline blushed, suddenly self-conscious again as the spotlight returned to her. She glanced down at her feet, unsure how to respond. I didn't think anyone would care," she admitted softly. "It's just something I do for myself, you know? Something I've always done alone." "Well, it shouldn't be," Emma said firmly, her tone leaving no room for argument. That was amazing, Caroline. You can't keep a gift like that to yourself. Others chimed in, echoing Emma's sentiments. Seriously, that was unreal, one of them exclaimed. You sounded like a professional singer. Another added, if you're not already performing somewhere, you absolutely should be. Despite the praise, Caroline found herself struggling to process everything. Part of her wanted to bask in the moment, to let the adoration wash over her, and enjoy the rare feeling of being celebrated. But another part of her felt exposed, vulnerable in a way that both exhilarated and unnerved her. Singing had always been her private escape, a safe haven where she could express herself without judgment. Sharing it with others, especially in such an intimate setting, left her feeling unmoored, as though she'd stepped into uncharted territory. Still, there was no denying the impact her performance had made. The energy in the room had changed entirely, charged with excitement and admiration. People lingered longer than planned, eager to talk to Caroline about her voice, her choice of song, and whether she'd ever considered pursuing singing more seriously. Some even suggested she join local choirs or audition for community theater productions. While Caroline brushed off most of these ideas with nervous laughter, she couldn't ignore the tiny spark of possibility igniting inside her. As the evening wound down and guests began heading home, Emma pulled Caroline aside for a quiet moment. Listen, she said earnestly, her hands resting on Caroline's shoulders. I'm serious about this. You have a real talent, and it deserves to be shared with the world. Don't let tonight just be a fun memory. Let it be the start of something bigger. Caroline hesitated, uncertainty flickering across her face. I don't know, Emma, she murmured. This is all so new to me. I've never thought of singing as anything more than, well, a hobby. And that's okay, Emma replied gently. But sometimes hobbies turn into passions and passions turn into purpose. Just promise me you'll think about it, okay? With that, Emma gave her a reassuring hug, leaving Caroline to mull over the night's events. As she lay in bed later, that night replaying the evening in her mind, she couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had shifted, not just in how others saw her, but in how she saw herself. For the first time, she allowed herself to entertain the idea that maybe, just maybe, her voice could lead her somewhere unexpected, somewhere wonderful. The days following the dinner party were a whirlwind of emotions for Caroline. On one hand, she felt a lingering sense of pride from the overwhelmingly positive reaction her singing had received. It wasn't every day that someone went from being quietly overlooked to becoming the center of attention, and such heartfelt, genuine attention at that. But on the other hand, the experience left her feeling vulnerable and unsure. Singing had always been her private sanctuary, a place where she could retreat without judgment or expectations. Now, with her friends' glowing praise still ringing in her ears, she couldn't help but wonder if sharing her voice had opened a door she wasn't ready to walk through. Emma, however, was determined not to let Caroline retreat back into her shell. The morning after the party, she called Caroline bright and early, her tone brimming with excitement. So, how are you feeling today, superstar? She teased, though there was an undercurrent of seriousness in her voice. Caroline groaned playfully, pulling the blanket over her head as if it might shield her from the conversation. I don't know, Emma. I mean, last night was nice, I guess, but it's not like I'm suddenly going to become some big performer or anything. Why not? Emma shot back immediately, her enthusiasm unwavering. You have a gift, Caroline, a real honest-to-goodness gift, and gifts like that aren't meant to stay hidden. Caroline sighed, knowing Emma wouldn't let this go any time soon. It's just scary, you know? Last night was one thing. It was fun, low pressure, all our friends. But actually putting myself out there, performing in front of strangers, that's a whole different story. Emma paused, sensing the hesitation in Caroline's voice. She softened her tone, speaking more gently now. I get it. Trust me, I do. Stepping outside your comfort zone is terrifying. But think about how amazing it would feel to share something you love with people who need to hear it. Music has a way of touching hearts, Caroline. Yours does, anyway. Caroline didn't respond right away. Instead, she stared out the window, watching the sunlight filter through the trees. Part of her wanted to dismiss Emma's words as overly idealistic, but another part, a quieter, deeper part, couldn't deny the truth in them. Singing had brought her joy for as long as she could remember. Why should she keep that joy to herself? Seeing that she was getting through, Emma pressed on. Look, I'm not saying you need to quit your job and audition for Broadway tomorrow, but maybe you could start small, like joining a choir or something, just to see how it feels to sing with other people. You wouldn't be alone and it wouldn't be high pressure. What do you say? For a moment, Karoline considered refusing. The idea of stepping onto a stage, or even standing beside others in a group performance, felt daunting. But then she thought about the way her friends had reacted when she sang, at the party. Their cheers, their applause, the tears in Emma's eyes, it had all been so unexpected, so affirming. Maybe Emma was right. Maybe it was worth taking a small step forward just to see where it might lead. Reluctantly, Karoline agreed. Okay, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I'll look into it. Emma squealed with delight. Yes. Oh my. Gosh, Karoline, you won't regret this, I promise. Over the next few days, Karoline did some research and discovered a local community choir that met twice a week at a nearby church. The description on their website sounded welcoming enough. A place for singers of all skill levels to come together and make music. Still, the thought of walking into a room full of strangers made her stomach churn. What if they didn't? Like her voice. What if she messed up during rehearsals? What if everyone judged her for being too quiet, too awkward, too her? On the evening of her first rehearsal, Karoline arrived 10 minutes early, clutching her water bottle like a lifeline. She hovered near the entrance, debating whether she should turn around and leave before anyone noticed her. But before she could talk herself out of it, a cheerful woman approached her with a warm smile. You must be new here, the woman said brightly, extending her hand. I'm Lisa, the choir director. Welcome. Karoline shook her hand nervously, mumbling a quick introduction. To her relief, Lisa didn't push her to say much more. Instead, she guided Karoline inside, introducing her to a few members of the choir and helping her find a seat in the alto section. As the room filled with voices warming up, Karoline felt a flicker of excitement mixed with anxiety. This was happening. She was really doing it. When the rehearsal began, Lisa led the group through a series of exercises designed to loosen their vocal cords and build confidence. At first, Karoline kept her voice soft, hesitant to blend in with the others. But as the session progressed, she found herself relaxing little by little. The harmonies swirled around her, lifting her spirits and easing her nerves. By the time they launched into their first full song, a lively gospel tune, she was smiling despite herself. Afterward, Lisa pulled Karoline aside for a quick chat. You've got a beautiful voice, she said sincerely. Don't be afraid to let it shine. Karoline blushed, unused to receiving compliments about her singing. Thank you, she murmured. I'm still getting used to all of this. Lisa nodded understandingly. That's completely normal. Everyone starts somewhere. Just remember, we're here to support each other. No judgment, no pressure, just music. Those words stayed with Karoline long after the rehearsal ended. For the first time since the dinner party, she felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe she didn't have to figure everything out right away. Maybe it was okay to take things one step at a time, to let herself explore this newfound passion without worrying about perfection or failure. Over the weeks that followed, Karoline continued attending rehearsals, gradually growing more comfortable with the group. She learned to hold her own during solos, to match her pitch with others, and to trust her instincts when harmonizing. More importantly, she discovered a sense of belonging she hadn't realized she'd been missing. The choir became a second family to her, a safe space where she could express herself freely without fear of rejection. One evening, as they wrapped up a particularly energizing practice, Lisa announced that the choir would be performing at a charity event in a few months. It's a great opportunity for us to showcase our hard work and give back to the community, she explained. And we'll need volunteers for solo performances. Karoline froze, her heart skipping a beat. A solo? In front of hundreds of people? The mere thought made her palms sweat. But before she could shrink back into her seat, Lisa turned to her with an encouraging smile. Karoline, I'd love for you to consider taking on one of the solos. Your voice is truly special, and I think the audience would connect with it deeply. The room fell silent as everyone waited for her response. Karoline swallowed hard, torn between panic and possibility. Could she really do this? Was she ready to step onto a stage and bare her soul in front of strangers? Finally, she nodded, surprising even herself. Okay, she whispered. I'll try. Her fellow choir members erupted into applause, offering words of encouragement and support. As she sat there, surrounded by their kindness, Karoline realized something important. She wasn't alone anymore. Whatever happened next, she would face it with courage and with the people who believed in her by her side. The weeks leading up to the charity event were a blur of rehearsals, nerves, and quiet determination for Karoline. As the date drew closer, her initial excitement began to give way to a creeping sense of dread. Every time she thought about standing on stage in front of hundreds of strangers, her stomach churned. What if she forgot the lyrics? What if her voice cracked or wavered under pressure? Worst of all, what if the audience didn't connect with her performance? These questions haunted her late at night when sleep refused to come. Despite her fears, Karoline threw herself into preparing for the solo. She practiced tirelessly, often staying up late after choir rehearsals to run through her piece one more time. The song Lisa had chosen for her was a timeless ballad, rich with emotion and depth, qualities that suited Karoline's voice perfectly. Still, mastering it wasn't easy. There were moments during practice when she stumbled over tricky high notes or lost her breath mid-phrase. Each mistake felt like a reminder of how far out of her comfort zone she'd ventured. Emma noticed the change in her best friend almost immediately. Gone was the lightheartedness Karoline usually carried. Instead, she seemed weighed down by self-doubt. Determined to help, Emma invited herself over for an impromptu practice session one evening. Armed with snacks and a playlist of inspirational songs, she arrived at Karoline's apartment ready to boost her spirits. Okay, Emma said as she plopped onto the couch, spreading out blankets and setting down plates of cookies. Let's hear it. Karoline hesitated, clutching her water bottle tightly. I don't know, Emma. I'm not feeling very confident right now. That's exactly why we're doing this, Emma replied firmly but gently. You can't let fear win, Karoline. You've worked so hard for this moment. Let me remind you just how incredible you are. Reluctantly, Karoline agreed. She stood in the middle of the living room, closed her eyes, and began to sing. Her voice filled the small space, trembling slightly at first, but growing stronger with each note. By the time she reached the chorus, tears glistened in Emma's eyes, not from pity but from sheer admiration. See? Emma said when Karoline finished. That's why everyone believes in you. Your voice isn't just beautiful, it's powerful. It tells a story and people will feel it. Trust me. Her words lingered in Karoline's mind long after Emma left. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to imagine the possibility of success instead of failure. Maybe, just maybe, she could pull this off. As the day of the charity event approached, the choir gathered for their final dress rehearsal. The venue, a grand downtown theater, was both awe-inspiring and intimidating. Its high ceilings, velvet curtains, and rows upon rows of seats made Karoline feel tiny and insignificant. But Lisa, ever the calming presence, reminded everyone why they were there, to share music and bring joy to others. You've all worked so hard, Lisa said, addressing the group before they began. Tonight is about celebrating that effort and connecting with the audience. Don't worry about perfection. Just focus on telling your story through the music. When it was Karoline's turn to rehearse her solo, she stepped onto the stage for the first time. Standing beneath the bright lights, she felt exposed and vulnerable. But as she started singing, something shifted. The echo of her voice bouncing off the walls gave her a strange sense of strength. For a brief moment, she forgot about the empty, seats, and imagined the theater filled with people who needed to hear her song. That mental image steadied her nerves and gave her confidence. On the evening of the performance, the theater buzzed with anticipation. Friends, family members, and community supporters filed in, chatting excitedly as they took their seats. Backstage, the choir members huddled together, offering last-minute encouragement and sharing nervous laughter. Karoline sat quietly in a corner, scrolling through messages of support from Emma and others. Each word served as a reminder that she wasn't alone. Finally, the lights dimmed, and the show began. The choir opened with a rousing ensemble number that earned enthusiastic applause from the audience. One by one, individual performances followed, each showcasing the unique talents of the singers. When it was Karoline's turn, she took a deep breath, adjusted the microphone stand, and walked onto the stage. For a split second, the enormity of the moment threatened to overwhelm her. Hundreds of faces stared back at her, bathed in the soft glow of the spotlight. Her hands trembled and her throat tightened. But then she remembered Lisa's advice. Tell your story. Closing her eyes, she let the first note escape her lips. From the moment she began singing, the room seemed to transform. The chatter and rustling of programs faded into silence as the audience became captivated by her voice. It was clear that this wasn't just a performance, it was an experience. Karoline poured every ounce of emotion she had into the song, letting the lyrics flow straight from her heart. Her voice soared effortlessly, wrapping around the listeners like a warm embrace. As the final note hung in the air, the theater erupted into applause. At first it was scattered, hesitant, as if the audience couldn't believe what they'd just witnessed. Then, slowly but surely, the clapping grew louder, more unified. People rose to their feet, giving Karoline a standing ovation. Tears streamed down her face as she bowed deeply, overwhelmed by the response. Backstage, the choir members cheered wildly, pulling her into hugs and showering her with praise. Lisa beamed with pride, patting her on the shoulder. You did it, she said simply, her voice thick with emotion. You truly did it. For Karoline, the moment was surreal. All her doubts and fears melted away, replaced by a profound sense of accomplishment and gratitude. She realized that this wasn't just about her. It was about the connection she'd forged with the audience, the way her voice had touched their hearts. And for the first time, she understood what Emma and Lisa had been trying to tell her all along. Her talent wasn't meant to stay hidden. It was meant to shine. After the show, friends and strangers alike lined up to congratulate her. Some shared personal stories explaining how her performance had moved them to tears. Others asked if she planned to pursue singing professionally. While Karoline smiled and thanked everyone graciously, she knew she wasn't ready to make any big decisions yet. What mattered most was that she'd taken a leap of faith and landed squarely on solid ground. That night, as she lay in bed replaying the events in her mind, Karoline felt a deep sense of peace. She may not have had all the answers about where this journey would take her, but one thing was certain. She'd discovered a new part of herself, and that discovery was worth every ounce of fear she'd faced along the way. The aftermath of the charity event felt like a whirlwind for Karoline. What had started as a quiet, personal journey into singing had suddenly become something much bigger than she ever imagined. The standing ovation at the theater was only the beginning. Within days, word of her performance spread far beyond the walls of the venue. Local newspapers picked up the story, praising her once-in-a-generation voice and describing her solo as the highlight of the evening. Social media buzzed with clips of her performance, shared by attendees who couldn't stop talking about how moved they'd been. Friends tagged her in posts, strangers left comments calling her inspirational, and even people she hadn't spoken to in years reached out to congratulate her. At first, Karoline struggled to process it all. She wasn't used to being in the spotlight or having so many eyes on her, and the sudden attention made her uneasy. But alongside the discomfort came a growing sense of pride. For so long, she'd kept her love for singing tucked away, treating it as a private hobby that didn't deserve recognition. Now, faced with overwhelming proof that her voice resonated deeply with others, she began to see herself differently. Maybe Emma had been right all along. Maybe her talent was meant to be shared. One afternoon, while scrolling through her phone during a rare quiet moment, Karoline stumbled upon a message from Lisa, the choir director. Attached to the note was an invitation to audition for a regional vocal competition. "I know this might seem like a big step," Lisa wrote, "but I truly believe you're ready. Your voice has a unique power, and competitions like this are designed to give singers like you a platform to grow." Karoline stared at the screen, her heart racing. A vocal competition? That sounded terrifying. Yet as she read Lisa's words again, she realized something important. She wasn't the same person who had nervously agreed to join the choir months ago. Singing had pushed her out of her comfort zone time and time again, and each challenge had taught her something new about herself. Could she really say no to another opportunity to grow? With Emma's encouragement ringing in her ears, "You've already proven you can do hard things," Karoline decided to take the leap. She spent weeks preparing for the audition, practicing tirelessly, and working closely with Lisa to refine her technique. When the day finally arrived, she walked into the audition room feeling equal parts terrified and exhilarated. As she sang, she focused not on impressing the judges but on telling her story through the music. And when she finished, the panel's smiles told her everything she needed to know. To her amazement, Karoline was selected to compete in the regional finals. Over the next several months, she immersed herself in the world of competitive singing, learning more about her craft than she ever thought possible. Each round brought its own challenges, but also its own rewards. With every performance, Karoline grew more confident, more assured in the knowledge that her voice mattered, not just to her, but to everyone who heard it. The regional finals took place in a large auditorium packed with spectators, including many of Karoline's friends and family. As she stepped onto the stage, she felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. This journey had been full of twists and turns, moments of doubt and triumph, and none of it would have been possible without the support of those around her. When she began to sing, her voice carried not just her own emotions but the collective energy of everyone who had cheered her on along the way. When the results were announced later that evening, Karoline didn't win first place, but it didn't matter. The audience's standing ovation said more than any trophy could. Judges praised her for her authenticity and emotional depth, qualities that set her apart from other contestants. More importantly, the experience solidified something Karoline had begun to suspect. Her true reward wasn't the accolades or titles. It was the joy she found in sharing her gift with others. In the weeks and months that followed, invitations poured in. Local community theaters asked her to perform at fundraisers, schools invited her to speak to students about pursuing their passions, and even a few small venues offered her opportunities to headline intimate concerts. Karoline accepted some of these offers, carefully balancing her newfound role as a performer with her everyday life. She knew she wasn't ready to dive headfirst into a full-time music career, but she also knew she couldn't go back to keeping her talent hidden. Through it all, Karoline remained grounded. She often reflected on how far she'd come since that fateful dinner party, where Emma's joke had sparked an unexpected chain of events. Back then, she'd never dreamed of stepping onto a stage or hearing her name cheered by crowds of strangers. Yet here she was, living a life she once thought was reserved for someone else, someone braver, bolder, more extraordinary. The truth, she realized, was that bravery wasn't about being fearless. It was about moving forward despite fear. Boldness wasn't about seeking attention. It was about embracing your gifts and letting them shine. And extraordinariness? That wasn't something you were born with. It was something you discovered when you dared to try. Today, Karoline continues to share her voice with the world, one performance at a time. Whether she's singing in front of hundreds at a concert hall or simply harmonizing with her choir mates during rehearsal, she does so with a deep appreciation for the journey that brought her here. Her story serves as a reminder that sometimes the most remarkable transformations begin with a single moment, a chance to step outside your comfort zone, to let others see the brilliance you've kept hidden. For Karoline, that moment came when a group of friends teased her into singing at a dinner party. For someone else, it might come in a different form: a kind word, a random opportunity, or even a gentle nudge from a loved one. Whatever shape it takes, the lesson remains the same. Don't be afraid to share your light with the world. You never know whose life you'll touch, including your own.